Hello friends, my name is Cody and I'm with LaunchDarkly. And in this video, we're going to talk about deploying and iterating on applications in Azure App Service and releasing new features with LaunchDarkly. Let's jump in and take a look. Here are in Visual Studio Code where I've built out a simple application using Python and Flask. Flask is an API toolkit for building APIs in Python. You can see in this application, I've brought in the LaunchDarkly config as well as the LaunchDarkly client. I have no feature flags in place yet. Now, I've configured this application already to be running in Azure App Service. So if I go over to the Azure extension, I can see the details for that service here. I can expand this and start to inspect more about that actual application. If I right click on it and I do browse to website launches, we can see the app is up and running. If we go take a look at it inside of the Azure portal, we can see some of the details around this actual application. Now, one of the things I love about Azure App Service is the ability to iterate and build out new versions of the web page. At LaunchDarkly, we care a lot about the idea of releasing new features, but we still recognize you need that deploy step to go and deploy out the new application. But we really shorten the timeline of making that deploy and then release component that we specialize in by using something like App Service. We don't have to worry about going and building a new Docker container or redeploying onto Kubernetes. We just deploy the updated application. So let's make a couple of changes to the app itself. Right out of the gate, we're going to bring in our SDK key for our LaunchDarkly environment. This lets us have that communication channel open back to LaunchDarkly from the SDK that lives inside of our app. We'll also grab our first feature flag in. This one's going to be called text return, and what it's going to do is return back a true or false flag. So if the value is true, it's going to render the new code that we're going to bring into the application. If it's false, it's going to continue doing the this app is up text that we had before. We'll also bring in that condition statement that I just talked about. If that show feature object is true, we're going to make a request out to the Star Wars API and return back the first one in that list. And then close out our client, return as a JSON object. Again, if not, it's going to return back that previous text. So we're going to save this now. We're going to go ahead and redeploy it. And while this redeploys, we'll pop into LaunchDarkly and create this feature flag. So now that I've saved this file, we're going to go over into our directory. We're going to right click and we're going to do deploy to web app. We're going to choose our existing web app and allow it to go get started. So while that deployment happens, we're going to pop over and we're going to create a new feature flag for this text return. So we'll pop into LaunchDarkly and we're in our project. We'll create a new feature flag. We're going to name this API call. We're going to change the key to be text return. Enables external API call. It's true or false, so we'll say API on or API off for the name. This feature flag is now created in the platform. We can see it's serving API on by default or API off if the flag is turned off. Let's switch back into VS Code and see what our deployment status looks like. Great, our deployment to LD API is completed. It's updated with the new changes. So if we switch back to the other screen, hit refresh, we can see our app is still up. And if we go into LaunchDarkly and enable this feature flag, save our changes, and refresh again, we can see that we're returning the new data for this flag. So we're actually returning an external API call that's telling us all about one of our favorite characters from the Star Wars franchise, Luke Skywalker. And in this example, we've been able to show how fast we can iterate on these changes and push out new versions of an application using Azure App Service, but then also iterate on the feature changes using LaunchDarkly. This is a great example of breaking apart the idea of deploying an application, i.e. the static set of Python content out to Azure, and releasing new features as we build them live inside the platform. Hope you enjoyed this video. Looking forward to talking to you again soon.